Okay, now we are, let's see, December the 11th, 2009, on our way to Mexico. Yesterday we went through the Panama Canal.
Yay!
Yeah. So today we are on the part that talks about family. And the question is, who are your parents and who are your grandparents? And a few things that you know about them that you would want our listeners to know.
Okay, my father is Ivan Quirk Barton, and he was born in Manti and grew up in Manti and lived most of his life in Manti, except for the brief time that they lived in California and a winter in Centerfield. My mother is Verda Grace Rosenthal, and she was born in Gunnison or Centerfield and grew up there. Her mother died when she was 12 years old, and so she was kind of a bit of an orphan because her father, the story goes that her mother died when she was 12, 19 days, I think it was 19 days after Camille was born. And so Aunt Carrie raised Camille, and the family kind of pushed my grandfather, tried to push him into marrying Aunt Carrie, and so he just kind of divorced himself from the whole family. And so my mother really, except for going to visit Aunt Carrie, become very much on her own at an early age. She didn't get to finish junior high even.
So her dad kind of left the family?
Well, he just, my mother and Uncle Blaine lived with him for a little while, but then he more or less didn't want them there anymore, I guess. And
So then they went to live with Aunt Carrie?
well, not really. Mom went out on her own really young, and so
She was in junior high. She was on her own?
no, it was after junior high. She got a full-time job, though she never did get to finish school. She was a very good student, and she can spell. She can spell anything. My dad is not a good speller, but my mother is a very good. She was a good student, and she really was unhappy that she couldn't go
Well,
on
then
to
when
school.
she went out on her own, who did she live with?
I guess a roommate. And then she went to Salt Lake, and Daddy followed her up there, and it's written up in my history.
Okay.
And I don't know. I did not meet my grandfather Rosenthal until he was on his deathbed. Never had anything to do with him. And so my father's mother died before I was ever born, too. And I knew Grandpa Barton a little bit, but not really, because he had remarried and had 3 daughters. And I got to know Helen quite well when we were in Bakersfield. And
She was your
they also-
stepsister?
That's my dad's half-sister.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And I knew Faye and Helen when they lived with Aunt Belle. That's my father's uncle's wife, because Grandpa kind of had them live someplace else, and then he went to work in Salt Lake at Hillfield and lived with Aunt Jenny, and I saw him once in a while, but never did really know him. So basically I grew up without any grandparents, but down the street from us, when we were living in the Works place, there was a couple whose last name was Johnson, and they had bees and made honey and had honeycomb, and I asked them if they would be my grandparents, and they did. It was interesting because at the time I asked them if they'd be my grandparents, my my great-grandmother had just passed away, and I did know her until I was about 5 and a half. And there's a picture in my history, and she's in one swing and I'm in the other swing.
Oh, I saw that.
Yes, but after she died, I went down and asked.
You don't have
Johnson's-
that with you, do you?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay.
If they would be my grandparents. And they were good grandparents. I would go down there all the time, and they'd give me honeycomb, the wax from the bees, and they were really good to me. So
That's a neat story.
I made up for not having other grandparents.
All right.
Yeah. And I really can't tell you much about my grandparents because I never did really know any of them except Grandpa Barton, just a little bit.
Okay. How about the question about your parents? What were some of your fondest memories of your dad and of your mom?
Well, when we were living in the works place, my mother and Robert grew a great big garden. It was during the Depression, and my dad went down to the service station and played chess all the time. And I remember Mama sending me down to the service station to bring Daddy home for lunch all the time. And my dad kind of formed a co-op with other people, and they would buy food by the case. And then I remember taking cans of tomato juice and things like that and delivering to other people when they needed it from this case of things that he had, that he bought by the case. And I think some of my happiest childhood memories were at the works place. We had chickens, and one of the chicken coops.
Wasn't the works place, though, the place where you had to go to the outhouse?
No, that was later.
Oh.
But the works place was the one that was on 4th North and 1st West in Manti.
Okay.
And so this chicken coop that had been abandoned.
Oh, you made a playhouse.
Made a playhouse, and I'd take the wooden egg cases that were 2-layered. That's the way they used to, crate the eggs. And I'd make it into a little cupboard, and I'd get empty tuna fish cans and things like that, and they would be my dishes. And I remember doing a lot of mud pies. And Lorraine and Patsy Shand lived across the street, and we played together a lot. And I had a cat named Honey that had long white hair. And when she disappeared, I cried and cried, and
I remember reading about
went down to the
that.
Cottonwood and looked for that cat. Never did find out what happened to it. We had a dog named Buddy, and one of the neighbors put strychnine in some meat and killed Buddy, and that was so sad. We had a funeral and took her out to the willows that was in the back of the yard, and buried Buddy there. But I really enjoyed the time at the works place. And then my dad fell behind on the payments, and Utah Poultry took the chickens. And we moved to a 2-story, only cold water running adobe house. And that was sad, because before we left the works place, my dad put in a towel bathtub, and he really fixed the house up and stuccoed it, kind of a light yellow. Before that it had been red, just a red stucco that was not even like the stucco we have nowadays. It was a smooth stucco. So anyway, we went down to the 2-story adobe house, which had only a cold water tap, and they had torn down part of the house to make room. They were, my uncle was going to build a house, and he had it partially dug out and framed, and I think the cement had been poured. But the main floor of the house had the cold water tap and a bed and a table. And that was it. And then you went outside, and on the outside there were steps going up to the 2nd story, and it was just terrible. In the winter, you had to hang on to the rail, and it was really dangerous.
And
But
what did you call
we all
that?
slept. The whole family slept in that one room.
Wow.
Yeah, and
What did you call that place? The other one was called the works place, you
well,
said.
and this other one was Uncle Henry's place, Henry Anderson's place. And he let us buy it for not very much money because he remarried. And he moved to the woman's house that he married because it was a nice house. And then my dad did finish the basement, and it had 2 bedrooms and a kitchen and a living room and a bathroom, and there was a big arch between the kitchen and the living room. And later, Claire Christiansen's parents bought that house, and then they built up on top of it. So it was a real nice house when Claire Christiansen lived there. Claire Christiansen later bought a home south of us and built a home south of us in Granger. And so all of you kids knew Claire.
He was our home teacher.
Yes, well, he was our bishop and then a stake president, and now he's on a mission at the temple in Switzerland. He enjoys.
Awesome.
And so one of the memories I remember, mentioning Joyce, her father took me down to Aunt Carrie's in Gunnison, and I stayed with her for a few days and helped her candle eggs. And that was kind of a fun experience.
Huh.
But after Daddy had finished building the home in the basement, and it was, really small but nice, Robert kept his room up above the adobe place, and the girls and I all shared one room, and Mom and Dad the other one. But Daddy got restless. Anytime he was through with a project, he wanted to move on to something else. And so they built a little tiny grocery store up at 201 East 3rd North in Manti. And the store was so successful that he decided that they should build a big store. So we sold the place there on 2nd North and moved to Simmons Place until they had the store. The little store was moved across the street, and then he built a big store with a home attached to it. And so that's...
Grandpa built that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was a builder. He could do anything he
Yeah,
set
I
his
know
mind
you
to
said
do.
that.
And it was not finished when we moved into it.
You lived in the basement, I bet.
No, we didn't live in the basement there, but there was no flooring. It was just subflooring on the floor. And there was an old carpet in the kitchen, and the living room wasn't finished at all. And Lane and Nancy and I slept down the basement, but it was totally unfinished. And Robert slept down there too, in a different area. And then they kind of, divided things up and separated them so that we had rooms. But it was interesting because we used cardboard boxes from the store to put up on the wall. We didn't have drywalling or anything. We just tacked up the cardboard boxes on the 2x4s.
Interesting.
And that's the way we lived for quite a while.
I remember sleeping in the basement. That was kind of special when we went to Grandma's.
Yeah.
And there was the then there was the bathroom area that was kind of almost like a hallway, you go from...
Well, the toilet set here and the wash basin was here.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we've got just about 5 more minutes, I think. Maybe 10. And what the next question is, how did your parents die, and how did your grandparents die, and how did that affect you? You've kind of touched on, your grandparents. You didn't really know them, but how they actually passed away. And I think part of the reason why I'd ask these questions...
Well, my mother's mother died as a complication of childbirth. And...
she wasn't the one in the insane asylum. I thought that was your mother's.
That's my father's.
Your father.
mother.
Oh, okay.
I think she was going through the change of life, and she may have been bipolar.
Right.
She had some problems, and
from what you've described with your dad, he may have been as well.
Yes, but in those days they really didn't know how to treat menopause, and they didn't know how to treat bipolar. And I guess that Grandpa had her committed to they call it the White House on the Hill in Provo, and she died there of, what was it? What do they called it. I can't remember what they called it, but it was anxiety, mania, and Grandpa, he lived to be quite old. He was working at Hillfield when he was 70 years old, and they had a big birthday party for him. But he lived with Aunt Jenny in Salt Lake, and he died there.
Of
So,
just old age?
yeah. And my father, he died at 52 of heart failure. He had had rheumatic fever when he was a young man, and it hadn't been treated, and his heart had gotten larger and larger. He had a rheumatic heart, and he never slowed down. He said he was going to live while he lived, and indeed he did. And he had been down to Ridgefield helping Robert with setting tile, and I think he probably just worked too hard and his heart gave out. And so that's how he died. My mother didn't die till she was 83, and she died of cancer actually, but she had had a bad heart for a number of years, and
Wasn't the cancer, didn't affect her colon?
No, it was all through her body. It had metastasized. And
But where did it begin?
we don't know.
Okay.
We don't know. But I had been trying to get her to go to the doctor, but she wouldn't go. She was diabetic, and she had a bad heart and was on oxygen all of the time. And then I was down staying with her this one weekend. It was over President's Day weekend, and the roof was leaking in her bedroom, so she had gone into one of the little apartments and was there, and she fell out of bed, and I couldn't get her up because she was quite heavy, and she had always said she'd never leave there except feet first, and I had to call an ambulance because I couldn't get her up and she was in pain. And so we went up to...
And it was just the two of you? You were the only one there with your mom when that happened?
Yes, I'd gone down that weekend.
Yeah, I know you...
went down a lot of weekends too. But,
you went down at great sacrifice month after month for a long time.
I was teaching school, but that weekend I went down there, and we took her up to the hospital in Mount Pleasant, and they did get her on her feet and did an x-ray, and they said, oh, we need to take her over to the Payson Hospital. So I called Robert and told him that Mom was really bad and that we were taking her over to the Payson Hospital. And that's what we did, and they diagnosed her with cancer that had metastasized and just gone all the way through her. And she lived, I can't remember how many days. It would have been about a week.
Wow.
And then she died. It was the cancer, though.
She was so skinnier, so much skinnier when she died, though.
She had lost weight, yeah, but she was... I never remember my mother when she was small.
Yeah, when I was growing up, she was always...
She's quite rotund.
Yeah. But when she died,
she and her sisters all wore corsets to hold the things firmer and make them look thinner.
Huh.
Yeah, I remember going to the store many times with her to buy a corset.
Oh.
But she was a good mother. She was a good, kind, loving mother. My father and I didn't get along really well because I always was interested in many things and in book learning, and my dad's definition of a college person was an educated dumbbell. And when I didn't get married right out of high school, which a lot of the expectation in Manti was, I went on to college and finished Snow, and then still hadn't gotten married according to what his definition was, and went up to the Y. And he was just always trying to prove that he was smarter than other people. I think he had a really
inferiority
poor
complex
image of himself, and so he tried to overcome it by proving he was better or smarter than other people. And it was really interesting because he died just right before I graduated from college. And they had the grocery store, and someone in the store said, well, aren't you proud of her for graduating from college? And he said, oh, yes, very. And I wish he had said that to me. Never once in my whole life. But I always did try to do what was right and be a good person. I think I was more naturally in tune with the Spirit and really believed in the gospel and wanted to do what was right and tried to do what was right. But he didn't give me credit for any of those things.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah, that was sad. Yeah.
Was your mom more?
My mother was good. She was good.
Did she let you know she was proud of you?
Robert was always protecting my mother, especially in the years when my dad drank. And my dad was always standing up for my mother. And
you mean Robert was?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And helping her. And she just naturally, he was the only boy. She favored him, and it was very apparent that she, favored him. And but yeah, she was, really good. I remember growing up that most Sundays she wanted to get away. So she would go down to her sister's in Gunnison and in Centerfield. And she always took Nancy and I with her, and very often took some of my girlfriends with me. So we would go down there, and Donald, being my age, we would always get together with the boys down in Gunnison.
And you enjoyed that?
Yes, we really had a good time. Yeah, and my mother sewed all the time.
Yeah, she did. She always made us pajamas.
Right.
Nightgowns right before Christmas.
I never had a dress until I was a junior in high school. And then I did have a boughten dress and a boughten formal because my mother sewed, and she sewed nice clothes. Yeah. And I always felt good about the clothes that I had. I wasn't able to buy the Joyce shoes and the Jansen sweaters like those who were more affluent in town did. But I was always dressed nicely, and I learned to sew at an early age too. So
yeah. You sewed my wedding dress.
Yes, and I got a ribbon at the state fair for a little suit I sewed.
Sewing was a big deal in your family.
Yeah. It wasn't the state fair; it was the county fair. It would have gone to state, but it was during the war years, and they didn't
do that back then.
They didn't have the state fair that year.
We have just about one more minute, and I can't remember if you really said how your mother's parents died. We've talked about your dad and your mom and your dad's.
I told
your
you.
mother's too. Okay.
My mother's mother died when Mama was 12.
Oh, that's that one. Okay, that's right. And her dad died. Later on. He remarried.
Yeah, he remarried.
Had 3 kids.
Had
okay.
Nothing. No, that was my father's father.
Okay.
But my Emil Rosenthal, he remarried and had one more son. He had Leo.
Okay.
But in all the years, we never did go visit him, and he never once came to our home, ever. So
how did he die? Do you know?
Well, all I remember is I was in high school, and Mama took Nancy and I down, and he was at Aurora, and he was in bed, and he was dying. I don't even remember what it was he was dying of. But my mother decided that she should go see him before he died. And that's the only time I ever met him. I never, ever met him another time than that.
So as far as genetics go, there's possibilities of heart problems, diabetes, of
cancer.
Bipolar, cancer. Yeah. That's pretty much it that I remember you mentioning.
Yeah, those are things most families.
Somebody in the family. Well, later on when we have a chance to visit as this cruise goes on, then we'll talk about the next time about your children and your grandchildren, where they live and what they're doing. And bless your heart, I interviewed Dad a few days ago, and he did pretty good, really. But I have a feeling that you'll be a little bit more thorough on those subjects than Dad. Okay, talk to you later, everybody.